We've been joined from Cardiff by the Labour MP Owen Smith, who challenged Jeremy Corbyn for the Labour leadership over the summer. Welcome to the Daily Politics, Owen Smith.
Good to be back.
Yeah, we haven't seen you for a while. If the government has to come forward not just with a motion to trigger Brexit, but with an act of Parliament which may contain some of the positions it intends to take in the negotiations, would you seek to amend these conditions?
Well, I'd seek to amend it so as to be certain that we've got the fullest possible explanation from the government as to what their vision is for a post-Brexit world, what they want to try and achieve. And I've also said that I think that's another opportunity for us to either see whether there is a further parliamentary vote at the end of the process such that we can once more ratify it, or indeed potentially a second referendum in which the people of Britain, in another active democracy, could determine whether they want to finally ratify what we're actually going to have, as opposed to what we were promised back in June.
That's a little bit down the road yet. I'll come to that in a minute. Let me stick with this process, with the Parliament's role in determining the government's negotiating position. Would you seek to make it a negotiating position with you and your like-minded colleagues that the government should attempt to remain a member of the single market?
That would definitely be one of the things I would like to see as a red line in our negotiation. And therefore, that is absolutely one of the things that I think ought to be stipulated by Parliament as one of the conditions on the government in going into the negotiation. Now, they may not agree with that, of course, but that is my view, and that's what I try and achieve.
So, and I'm grateful for you clarifying that. Do you understand that's why people on the other side believe that this is a way of really watering down the result on June the 23rd, because it follows that if we remain a member of the single market, we remain under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and we are subject to the freedom of movement rules. So this is really a way of undermining the decision taken on June the 23rd. You understand that, don't you?
I do understand that, and I think the answer to that, Andrew, honestly, is potentially some of those things could apply, but we're going into completely uncharted territory. 2 years of open-ended negotiation with European partners who themselves are going through, as you will know, elections next May and next September. I think there are many moving parts in this machine and all sorts of possible outputs from the machine, and we need, I think, to be clear from the government as to what they think the red lines are. And
but I'm trying to be clear what your red lines are, because it looks.
Well, I think we should stay within the European Union.
Yeah, I know
also think we should stay within the.
So I'm trying to work out how you plan to undermine it. Having lost it, I'm trying to work out how you want to undermine it. Do you want to see would you try to get amendments that the government's negotiating position should put very limited curbs on free movement as much more as important, so that we remain a member of the single market? Would you want to see that as its position?
Well, I would definitely want to reflect what I think is actually, if you look at the polls, majority opinion in Britain, which is the economic circumstances are more important and the economic outcomes than controlling immigration. That's certainly what repeated polls have shown. I mean, and that means staying within the single market. And I would like to see the government being clear as to whether they think staying within the single market and getting the best economic terms for Britain, or controlling immigration from within the EU, which one of those two binary choices, if you like, is the most important red line for them? I think it should be single market.
People watching this will see, if you want the government's negotiating position to be to remain a member of the single market, I emphasise the word member, to remain a member of the customs union and not to do much to control free movement of peoples within the single market, that is tantamount to reversing the decision this country voted for on June the 23rd.
Well, you say that, Andrew. I'm not sure that's true, because I don't think. Well, a lot of it is wrong. I don't think the membership of the single market was on the ballot paper. I think it was a very simple, do you want to leave or stay within the European Union? The fundamental point that I made all summer, and I continue to make, is that we weren't given clarity from either side of the campaign, frankly, but certainly from the Brexit side of the campaign, as to what the real red lines were and what the real outcomes were. In fact, we were told a load of lies about the prospect of more money for the NHS, none of which was true.
Because David Cameron was explicit that we would leave the single market if we voted to leave. George Osborne was explicit on that. Boris Johnson was explicit that we would leave the single market. Michael Gove was explicit. I mean, what bit didn't you understand that if we leave the European Union, we cease to be members, different from access, of the European Union?
Andrew, with respect, I think that is slightly unfair, a bit of revisionism. What you've just highlighted were lots of people, apart from Michael Gove, who were campaigning on the Remain side of the equation. Many people on the Brexit side of the equation fudged that, or indeed went much further. I remember Daniel Hannan being interviewed, I think, on your programme, and saying that this wasn't about necessarily leaving the single market. So we were left tantalisingly wondering whether this was going to mean big controls on immigration. Was it going to mean we were going to leave the single market? The customs union, I don't remember being discussed at any point during the entire period of the referendum. We were in the dark as to what the real output was going to be, and we still are. And the simple point that I and many of my colleagues are making across the House is it's the job of Parliament to scrutinise the government. This is the most important decision we've taken economically, culturally, arguably, in my lifetime. And I think it's our job to scrutinise it. And if like me, you still believe that we are better off within the European Union, then we should be allowed to continue to make that argument.
If the government comes forward with a motion to ratify Article 50, but not with the negotiating position of which you would approve, will you vote against Article 50?
Potentially, yes.
Could you tell us, that is your position, and you've just been very clear there, could you tell us what the Labour Party's position is?
No, I think the Labour Party's position, as I've seen it so far, is that they too are going to wait and see. We're going to wait collectively and see what the government come forward with, and then make a judgment. But my impression, hearing colleagues talking, is that most colleagues feel that we couldn't possibly do anything other than trigger Article 50. I disagree with them, and I think that if we have if we've got a very limited view from the government as to what triggering Article 50 is going to mean for the country, if we've got a one-line bill that is designed to minimise and mitigate against scrutiny, and if we have no further clarity as to whether Britain is going to be better or worse off as a result of the ending of the negotiations, then I think the right thing for me to do on behalf of my constituents is not to vote to make them worse off.
How much do you fear that if Parliament is seen to thwart the government's strategy for the Brexit negotiations, that the government simply calls an election early next year and Labour faces a wipeout in the north of England?
Well, they might choose to do that, call an election, that is, and if they do, good, because I think we need to see the back of this Tory government.
You don't think that's going to happen, though, do you?
I'm not entirely convinced it's going to happen, no. You might have seen what I said during the summer. I was slightly sceptical about our prospects of booting them out right now. But I don't think it'll be the only issue on which people vote. I think people are very sensible in this country. I trust the British people to make sensible decisions, but I think they need the full facts before them. And my contention throughout the referendum debate and since is that they weren't given the full facts, and we need to see the full facts before we have a final say.
We're going down the say. I've got one very quick question for you, which I hope I need a quick answer. If you have the opportunity, because there will be a chance to amend the Article 50 legislation, would you attempt to insert into that a second referendum, which is the policy you stood on in the Labour Party once the negotiations are over?
Yes, I will.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Owen Smith speaking to us there from Wales.